The evening had started out just like any other. The soft murmur of the television filled the living room, and the familiar scent of Olivia's favorite jasmine candle drifted through the air. I sat there, scrolling through emails, only half paying attention as she moved around the house. Then, without any warning, she positioned herself right in front of me, arms folded, and spoke words that cut through me like a knife. "I've fallen in love with another man, and we're having a baby." For a moment, I thought she was joking, some kind of cruel prank. I searched her face for any sign of mischief, a smirk, a glimmer in her eyes that would tell me she was teasing. But there was nothing. Her expression was cold, detached, like she had rehearsed this moment over and over. The air seemed to be sucked from the room. My heartbeat pounded in my ears so loudly that when I finally managed to ask her to repeat herself, I could barely hear my own voice. "I'm serious, Daniel," she said, her tone flat, emotionless. "I've moved on. I'm moving in with him. I need you out of the house by the end of the week." Our house. The place we had poured our savings into. The home where we had spent nights painting walls, debating over furniture, dreaming about the future. But now, that future no longer existed. And just like that, she was telling me to leave. I opened my mouth, trying to find the right words, something, anything, to make sense of what was happening. But nothing came out. I just sat there, stunned, staring at the woman I had spent nearly a decade with. She wasn't looking at me like the person she once loved. No, in that moment, I was nothing more than an obstacle she was finally ready to remove. "You need to accept this," she continued, her voice still eerily calm. "We've grown apart. This is what's best for me. For us. For us." The absurdity of those words hit almost as hard as the betrayal itself. I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, to beg her to tell me this wasn't real. But all I could do was sit there, frozen, as the life I thought I knew crumbled in front of me. The rest of the evening passed in a haze. She spoke about logistics as if she were planning a weekend getaway, not tearing our marriage apart. "The movers will be here tomorrow," she informed me. "Take whatever you want, but I need the master bedroom cleared." Her words were clinical, detached. The woman I had loved was gone, replaced by a stranger I didn't recognize. When she finally walked away, I remained motionless, staring at the empty space she had left behind. The walls around me suddenly felt smaller, as if they were closing in. The weight of everything she had just said pressed down on me, suffocating. Had I been blind? Had I missed the warning signs? Was I too wrapped up in work, too comfortable in our routine to notice? Or had she simply been waiting for the right moment to reveal what she had already decided long ago? That night, sleep was impossible. Every time I shut my eyes, her words played on a loop in my head. "I fell in love with another man." Over and over, like a cruel refrain I couldn't escape. I replayed every moment of our marriage, searching desperately for clues, for something that could have warned me. But no matter how much I tried to make sense of it, nothing added up. By morning, I felt hollow. The movers she had hired were already packing up my things. I stood there, watching as strangers boxed up my life like it was nothing more than clutter to be discarded. She didn't even come to say goodbye. When I finally walked out, she was in the kitchen, sipping coffee like it was just another ordinary day. Driving away, I stole one last glance at the house. Our house. The place we had built, the life we had shared. It didn't belong to me anymore. It belonged to someone else, someone she had chosen over me. The realization struck deep, knocking the air from my lungs. I had been replaced. And for the first time in my life, I felt completely, utterly alone. As I left, the world outside felt unfamiliar. The streets I had driven countless times before blurred into a mess of colors and lights. I had no idea where I was going. My car felt like the only thing shielding me from the wreckage of my life. I fell in love with another man. Her voice echoed in my mind, each repetition reopening the wound. everything we had built together, gone. As if I had never existed in her world at all. She had erased me effortlessly, as though she were wiping a chalkboard clean, making space for someone new. My grip tightened on the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white as anger and sorrow wrestled for control inside me. Each mile I drove felt like I was putting more distance between myself and the life I had lost, but at the same time, I had never felt more lost myself. Eventually, I pulled into a motel parking lot, its flickering neon sign barely cutting through the darkness. The room I checked into was as unremarkable as I felt, just a bed, a desk, and the relentless buzz of fluorescent lighting. I dropped my bags, collapsed onto the mattress, and stared at the ceiling, feeling nothing but emptiness. Sleep refused to come. Every time I closed my eyes, my mind dragged me back to her, to the way she used to laugh at my terrible jokes, to the quiet mornings on the patio, to the vows we exchanged on our wedding day. But those promises had meant nothing. Not to her. And now, I had to figure out how to move forward, even when every part of me wanted to turn back. How had things unraveled to this point? Had I truly been blind to her unhappiness, or had she just done a damn good job of hiding it? The questions looped endlessly in my mind, each one cutting deeper than the last. The days that followed passed in a haze. I found a small apartment on the outskirts of town, nothing like the home I had left behind. The walls were bare, the furniture minimal, just the basics to get by. It didn't feel like home, but at least it was mine. I threw myself into work, showing up early, staying late, anything to keep myself occupied. I told myself that if I stayed busy enough, maybe I wouldn't feel the emptiness waiting for me every night. But even work couldn't fill the hollow ache in my chest. The nights were the worst. The silence pressed in from all sides, reminding me of everything I'd lost. I'd sit by the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance, wondering if Olivia ever thought about me. Was she happy? Did she ever feel even the slightest bit of guilt? The thought of her settling into a new life with him, raising their child in the house we had built together, was almost unbearable. Friends and family reached out. Texts. Calls. Messages filled with concern and support. But I couldn't bring myself to respond. I didn't want their sympathy. I didn't want to keep explaining what had happened when I barely understood it myself. So, I ignored them. I convinced myself I was fine, even as the loneliness sat heavy on my shoulders. The truth was, I didn't know how to move forward. The life I had spent years building had crumbled, and I was left standing in the ruins, unsure of how to start again. One night, as I sat alone in my apartment, I picked up an old photo of Olivia and me from our honeymoon. We were grinning, carefree, completely unaware of the future waiting for us. I stared at it for a long time before finally turning it face down on the table. That wasn't my reality anymore. She had made her choice. Now, I had to figure out how to live with it. But where did I even begin? How do you rebuild when the foundation of your life has been ripped out from under you? The questions followed me everywhere, their answers always just out of reach. All I knew was that I couldn't stay stuck in this limbo forever. If she could walk away so easily, maybe it was time for me to do the same, not just from her, but from the anger, the pain, the weight of it all. For now, the only thing I could do was take it one day at a time. A single step forward, no matter how small, was still progress. And maybe, just maybe, there was something waiting for me beyond the wreckage she had left behind. The weeks after I left were some of the hardest I'd ever faced. Each morning was a fresh reminder of what had been taken from me. I'd wake up in my unfamiliar apartment, the blank white walls mocking me with their emptiness. Olivia had moved on, and I was left with the pieces of what we used to be, trying to figure out how to build something new from the ruins. Work became my escape, the only place where things made sense. As a project manager, I was used to chaos, juggling deadlines, solving problems, keeping everything running smoothly. But this was a different kind of chaos, one I couldn't manage with a spreadsheet or a strategy. Still, throwing myself into work was better than coming home to an apartment that felt like nothing more than a shell. At first, I avoided everyone. Their well-meaning messages and missed calls piled up, but I didn't have the energy to deal with them. I knew they cared, but I wasn't ready for their pity, their questions. What happened? Are you okay? I didn't have the answers, so I kept my distance, isolating myself in a self-made cocoon of solitude. But even in that isolation, I started to find moments of clarity. The apartment, cold and empty as it was, slowly became something else, a fresh start. I bought a set of dishes, picked out a comfortable reading chair, hung a few pictures of my parents from when life felt simpler. Small things, but they were mine. And with each little addition, I started reclaiming a piece of myself that Olivia had stripped away. I also started looking back at my marriage with clearer eyes, seeing the cracks that had been there long before she walked away. Olivia's betrayal hadn't come from nowhere. The signs had been there all along, the way she had started pulling away, how she stopped laughing at my jokes, the late nights at work that I never questioned. I had been so focused on keeping things running, so determined to believe we were solid, that I hadn't seen the foundation breaking beneath us. Realizing that hurt, but in a strange way, it also set me free. For the first time, I stopped blaming myself entirely. Sure, I had made mistakes. I worked too much. I wasn't always as present as I could have been. But Olivia had made her choices. She had betrayed me, blindsided me, left without so much as a conversation. That wasn't on me. That was on her. And as the fog of grief started to lift, I began rediscovering the pieces of myself I had lost along the way. I pulled my old guitar out of storage, fingers clumsy on the strings at first, but gradually finding their rhythm. Music had always been my way of working through things, a way to say what I couldn't put into words. And now, I had a hell of a lot to say. Reconnecting with that part of myself felt like finding something I hadn't even realized was missing. I'd lose myself in the music, letting the notes carry me away, giving my mind a rare moment of peace. Then, on a whim, I decided to start running again, something I hadn't done in years. At first, it was more of a slow shuffle than an actual run, my legs protesting every step. But with each mile, I felt just a little lighter, as if I was leaving behind a fraction of the weight I had been carrying since Olivia's betrayal. The steady rhythm of my feet hitting the pavement became a kind of meditation, a way to quiet the storm in my head. And then, there were the small victories. The first time I cooked in my apartment and the meal actually tasted decent. The first time I laughed at some ridiculous sitcom joke. The first night I managed to sleep all the way through without waking up in a cold sweat. Individually, these moments didn't seem like much, but together, they meant something. They were proof that I was moving forward, even if it didn't always feel like it. Progress wasn't easy, and it sure wasn't a straight line. Some days, it felt like I was right back where I started, drowning in anger and sadness. But then there were days when I felt a spark of hope, a quiet reminder that maybe, just maybe, I could build a life worth living again. One night, as I stood in the middle of my apartment, I really saw it for the first time. The books on the shelf. The plants by the window. The rug I'd found on sale. It wasn't much, but it was mine. And for the first time, I felt like I belonged there. Olivia had taken our past, but she couldn't take my future. That was mine to shape, and I intended to make the most of it. I didn't know what that future would look like yet, but for the first time in a long time, I was ready to find out. Somewhere in the mess of rebuilding my life, a lifeline appeared, Gwen and Wes. We had been mutual friends, though I hadn't seen much of them since Olivia left. It started with a simple message from Gwen, "Hey, just checking in. Let us know if you need anything." It didn't feel like pity. It wasn't one of those empty offers people make when they don't know what else to say. It felt real. And for the first time in months, I actually responded. I agreed to meet them for coffee. I wasn't sure what to expect. Would they ask endless questions about Olivia? Would they try to fix me with unsolicited advice? But they didn't do any of that. They just listened. Over coffee, I talked about the loneliness, the sleepless nights, the way Olivia's betrayal had knocked me flat. Gwen, with her warm smile and no-nonsense attitude, met my gaze and said, "You didn't deserve any of that. And just so you know, we're here for you." Wes, quieter but just as sincere, simply nodded. "You're not alone, man." Their words stayed with me long after the coffee cups were empty. Gwen and Wes became my anchor, pulling me out of the isolation I had wrapped around myself. They invited me over for dinners, introduced me to their other friends, convinced me to join them on weekend hikes. At first, I felt like an outsider, stumbling through a world of easy laughter and comfortable friendships. But slowly, I started to feel like I belonged. Their kindness reminded me that not everyone leaves, that there were still good people in my life, people who genuinely cared. It wasn't just their support that helped me heal. It was their perspective. Gwen, ever the realist, had a way of making things seem smaller, less impossible. One night, as we sat on their porch watching the sun disappear behind the trees, she said, "What she did says more about her than it does about you. You're not defined by her choices." Wes, on the other hand, never tried to fix anything. He just showed up. Whether it was helping me move a couch into my apartment or handing me a beer while we watched a game, his presence alone reminded me that I didn't have to go through this alone. Sometimes, that was enough. As the weeks turned into months, Gwen and Wes nudged me out of my comfort zone in ways I didn't even realize I needed. They convinced me to join a local trivia night, despite my initial reluctance. I had no desire to make small talk with strangers, but to my surprise, I actually had fun. I found myself laughing, really laughing, for the first time in what felt like forever. Cracking jokes, high-fiving teammates, feeling, if only for a moment, like a normal guy again. Then, one weekend, they dragged me along on a group hiking trip to a state park. I hadn't been on a hike since college, and I was embarrassingly out of shape. The steep trails, the rocky terrain, every step was a challenge. But when we finally reached the summit, sweat-drenched and exhausted, the view knocked the air from my lungs. Standing there, looking out at the sprawling landscape below bathed in golden light, it hit me, this journey I was on, as painful and exhausting as it was, might actually be leading somewhere worth going. It was during one of those hikes that Gwen said something that stuck with me. We had stopped to rest at the top of a ridge, catching our breath, when she turned to me and said, "You know, you're allowed to be happy again." Something about the way she said it, so simple, so certain, made me believe it might actually be true. "You know, moving on doesn't mean forgetting what happened or pretending it didn't hurt," Gwen said, her voice steady. "But you deserve happiness, Daniel. Don't let Olivia take that from you." Her words struck something deep inside me. Until that moment, I hadn't realized just how much I had been holding myself back, clinging to the pain like it was the last proof that what we had was real. Somehow, I had convinced myself that letting go would erase it all, like it had never mattered. But Gwen was right. I deserved to move forward, to find happiness on my own terms. And it wasn't just Gwen and Wes who helped me see that. Through them, I met people whose strength inspired me in ways I hadn't expected. There was Alex, a fellow divorcee who had turned his heartbreak into a thriving art career. And Mia, a single mom balancing 2 jobs while earning her degree. Their resilience reminded me that life doesn't end when someone betrays you. It shifts. It forces you to adapt, to grow, to become something new. By the time spring rolled around, I felt like a different person. I was still healing, still figuring out where my life was headed. But I no longer felt like I was drowning. I had people in my corner, a community that reminded me of my worth, and a growing belief that maybe, just maybe, the best was yet to come. Looking back, I realized Gwen and Wes had given me more than just friendship. They had given me hope. And for that, I would always be grateful. Their support gave me the strength to step into this new phase of my life. But healing was never a straight road. Some days, I moved forward. Other days, doubt crept in like an old habit. I'd catch myself replaying old conversations with Olivia, wondering if I could have done anything, differently. But every time I felt myself slipping back into that spiral, I'd hear Gwen's words again, "You're allowed to be happy." And then, in the middle of it all, something unexpected happened. It wasn't dramatic, not some grand moment that screamed "this changes everything." It was just a small, ordinary thing. A moment that, without warning, shifted something inside me. It started with coffee. Or more accurately, a spilled cup of it. I had ducked into a local cafe one afternoon, needing a break from the quiet of my apartment. Sunlight streamed through the windows, the smell of fresh coffee filled the air, and for a little while, it felt good to be out in the world. I sat at a corner table, scrolling through emails, nursing a cup of black coffee, lost in thought. Then, out of nowhere, there was a sudden jolt, a loud gasp, and the unmistakable warmth of liquid seeping into my sleeve. "Oh my God, I am so sorry." I looked up to find a woman staring at me in wide-eyed horror, an empty coffee cup clutched in her hands. A dark stain spread across my shirt, and for a moment, all she could do was gape at it in panic. "I didn't mean to, I tripped on the chair leg, I swear it was an accident." She was flustered, her cheeks turning pink, her hands hovering in useless apology. And maybe it was her obvious distress, or maybe it was just the absurdity of the moment, but before I even thought about it, I chuckled. "It's fine," I said, grabbing a napkin. "Honestly, this shirt needed a refresh anyway." She blinked, surprised by my reaction, then let out a breathy laugh. "I don't know if you're being kind or sarcastic, but either way, let me buy you another coffee." I grinned. "I'll go with kind. And I won't say no to another cup." She introduced herself as Sarah as she handed me the fresh coffee. What started as a simple apology turned into a conversation, and before I knew it, we had taken seats at the same table, talking like old friends instead of two strangers brought together by an awkward spill. She had an easygoing nature, the kind of warmth that made the world feel a little lighter. She told me about her job as an elementary school teacher, how she spent her free time volunteering at a local animal shelter. There was something refreshing about her, authentic, unguarded, like she wasn't trying to be anything but herself. Our conversation stretched far longer than I expected. We talked about books, movies, the quirks of our hometown. And somewhere in the middle of it all, she made me laugh. A real laugh, deep and unrestrained, the kind I hadn't heard from myself in a long time. When it was finally time to leave, she grabbed a napkin, scribbled her number on the corner, and handed it to me with a playful smile. "In case you ever want to grab another coffee. This time, spill-free." I slipped the napkin into my pocket, and as I walked home, I caught myself smiling. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was something I hadn't felt in a long time. It was hope. And for now, that was enough. In the weeks that followed, Sarah and I kept in touch. What started as casual coffee meetings turned into dinners, then long walks through the park. I was cautious at first, hesitant to trust after everything I had been through. But Sarah never pushed. She let things unfold naturally, meeting me where I was. She was patient. Kind. Honest. And then there were the moments of vulnerability. The nights when I told her about my past, about Olivia, about the betrayal that had shattered my life. She didn't offer clichés or empty reassurances. She didn't try to fix me. She just listened, her eyes full of understanding. "You've been through hell," she said one night, her voice quiet but firm. "But you're still here. That says a lot about you." Those words stayed with me, echoing in my mind long after she had said them. They reminded me that I wasn't defined by what had happened to me. I was defined by how I chose to move forward. And slowly, I began to see myself the way she saw me. I was no longer just a man picking up the pieces, I was someone strong, someone worthy of happiness. As the months passed, my bond with Sarah deepened, not just as a new chapter in my life, but as proof that life could be rewritten entirely. With her, I found myself smiling more, laughing harder, and, for the first time in years, looking toward the future with something that felt a lot like hope. Looking back, I realized meeting Sarah was the true turning point. The past no longer felt like a weight shackled to my ankles. It had become a stepping stone, something that had brought me here, to something better. And I was finally ready to take the next step. As Sarah and I built a life together, I found myself moving further out of the shadows of my past. Life felt lighter, full of possibility. But even as I moved forward, Olivia's betrayal still lingered in the far corners of my mind, not as a longing for her, but as an old wound that hadn't fully healed. I heard snippets about her life through mutual friends. She and her lover had settled into the house we once shared. They had welcomed a baby boy into the world, their life seemingly whole. And though I had no desire to be part of that story, I couldn't deny the mix of emotions it stirred in me: resentment, sadness, maybe even a flicker of jealousy. Not because I wanted her back, but because she had moved on so completely, while I had been left to rebuild from the ground up. But with Sarah by my side, I learned to let those feelings go, little by little. 2 years passed. In what felt like the blink of an eye, my life had transformed in ways I never could have imagined. The consulting business I had started after my divorce had grown beyond my expectations. What had begun as a simple idea had become something real, thriving, stable, giving me not only financial security but a renewed sense of purpose. And Sarah? She had become more than just a source of comfort. What started as a quiet companionship had turned into something unshakable. She was my confidant, my partner, my greatest supporter. For the first time in years, I felt like I truly had someone in my corner. Someone who believed in me, not because of what I could provide, but because of who I was. Then, as life often does, fate decided to throw me a curveball. It was a sunny Saturday afternoon. Sarah and I had spent the morning running errands and decided to grab lunch at a cafe in the mall. We were laughing about something trivial, one of those inside jokes that only couples understand, when I felt it, that strange sensation of being watched. I turned, and there she was. Olivia. Our eyes met across the crowded mall, and for a brief moment, the world seemed to slow. She hesitated mid-step, her expression flickering between shock and something else: recognition, maybe regret. I hadn't seen her in 2 years. And she had changed. There were faint lines on her face that hadn't been there before, a weariness in the way she carried herself. Whatever had happened in those years, it had left its mark. "Daniel," she said, her voice cautious, uncertain, as she walked toward us. Beside me, Sarah glanced in my direction, sensing the shift in the air but saying nothing. Her presence grounded me in the present, anchoring me to the life I had built, the man I had become. I met Olivia's gaze, my tone polite but detached. Olivia. She just stood there for a second, as if trying to reconcile the man in front of her with the one she had left behind. And I wasn't that man anymore. I was dressed sharply, carrying myself with confidence, worlds away from the heartbroken wreck she had discarded. Sarah's hand rested lightly on my arm, a silent but unmistakable reminder of the life I had rebuilt. "You look good," Olivia finally said, her voice faltering slightly. Her eyes flickered toward Sarah before returning to me. "I didn't expect to see you here." I smiled faintly, though it didn't quite reach my eyes. Life's full of surprises. An awkward silence stretched between us, the weight of the past pressing in. She shifted, fiddling with the strap of her purse. "How have you been?" she asked after a moment, her voice strained. I thought carefully before answering. I had no interest in bitterness or revenge. That part of my life was over. "I've been good," I said simply. "Busy with work. Happy." The last word was deliberate, a quiet but undeniable truth. Olivia looked down, nodding slightly, her fingers still fidgeting. "That's good. I'm glad you're doing well." There was something different about her now, hesitation, maybe even insecurity. The woman who once dismissed me as predictable, as someone she had outgrown, now seemed almost unsure of herself. "I should let you two get back to your day," she said softly. She hesitated, as if there was more she wanted to say, but in the end, she simply turned and walked away. I watched her retreating figure, waiting for some kind of emotion to surface: anger, sadness, regret. But there was none. Instead, there was clarity. For the first time, I saw Olivia for who she really was, not through the lens of my pain or my past. She had made her choices. And I had made mine. Beside me, Sarah squeezed my arm gently, pulling me from my thoughts. "You okay?" she asked, searching my face. I turned to her and smiled, genuinely, completely. Better than okay. Because in that moment, I knew I was free. Free from the pain. The resentment. The what-ifs. Olivia was a closed chapter. And Sarah? She was my new beginning. As Sarah and I walked hand in hand through the mall, I felt lighter than I had in years, as if I had finally shed the last remnants of a weight I didn't even realize I was still carrying. That encounter with Olivia stayed with me, but not in the way I might have expected. There was no lingering anger, no fresh wave of resentment, just a quiet sense of closure. Olivia had expected to see me broken, struggling, maybe even bitter. Instead, she had come face to face with a man who had not only survived but thrived, a man she no longer knew. And in that moment, I realized that was the real victory. Sarah, always perceptive, waited until we were back home before bringing it up. "Do you want to talk about it?" she asked gently as we settled onto the couch. Her concern wasn't tinged with jealousy or insecurity, just genuine care. I thought about it for a moment before shaking my head. Not much to say. Seeing her today, it was like the last piece of the puzzle finally fell into place. I don't feel tied to that chapter of my life anymore. Sarah smiled, her eyes warm. That's a good thing. You deserve to move forward. And move forward, I did. My consulting business continued to grow, exceeding every goal I had once timidly set for myself. Each success felt like more than just a professional milestone, it was proof that I had reclaimed my sense of self-worth. The hesitant, self-doubting man I had been in my marriage was gone, replaced by someone who finally understood his value. Sarah became more than just my partner in life, she became my collaborator, my confidant. Her sharp, practical insights helped shape my business strategies in ways I never would have considered. She had a way of seeing opportunities where others saw roadblocks, and together, we became a team in every sense of the word. With her, there were no mind games, no manipulation, no need to prove my worth over and over again. Instead, there was trust, laughter, and a shared vision for the future. She showed me what love could be when it was built on mutual respect and a deep, unwavering connection. Meanwhile, through mutual acquaintances, I heard bits and pieces about Olivia. The life she had once painted in bold strokes of excitement and risk had lost its luster. The man she had left me for had moved on, leaving her to navigate single parenthood on her own. The house she had fought so hard to keep had become a financial strain, one she struggled to maintain. I didn't take pleasure in her misfortune. But I couldn't deny the quiet satisfaction of knowing that her choices had led her there. She had gambled on a dream, certain that she was trading up, and she had lost. It wasn't revenge. It was just the natural consequence of her actions. One evening, as Sarah and I cooked dinner together, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen, and for the first time in years, I saw Olivia's name. The message was short, almost hesitant. "Can we talk?" I stared at the screen for a long moment before showing it to Sarah. "What do you think?" I asked. She shrugged, her expression unreadable. "It depends on what you want. But remember, you don't owe her anything." Sarah was right. I didn't owe Olivia closure. I didn't owe her a conversation. Still, curiosity got the better of me. I replied with a simple, "What's on your mind?" Her response came quickly. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. I was surprised by the words, but they didn't evoke the reaction I thought they might. No validation. No satisfaction. No anger. Just nothing. I typed back. Thank you for saying that. I wish you all the best. And with that, the door to that part of my life closed for good. Sarah and I eventually got married in a small, intimate ceremony surrounded by close friends and family. It wasn't extravagant, but it was perfect, authentic, filled with love. The idea of fatherhood, once tied to Olivia and the life I had thought we would build, was replaced with dreams of the family Sarah and I might one day create together. As I stood beside her at our wedding reception, watching her laugh with our friends, I felt something overwhelming, gratitude. Life had tested me in ways I never could have predicted, but those trials had led me here, to this moment, with this woman, who had become my anchor and my greatest joy. Olivia had once called me predictable, boring. She had told me I lacked ambition or excitement. Maybe, at one time, she was right. But she couldn't have been more wrong about the man I would become. Looking back, I understood that Olivia's betrayal, painful as it had been, was the catalyst that forced me to grow, to discover my own strength, to redefine my worth. And standing there, hand in hand with Sarah, I knew one thing for certain, the best chapters of my life were still ahead of me. The years after Olivia's apology text blurred into a mix of joy, growth, and stability. Sarah and I continued to build not just our life together, but something even greater. We combined her creativity with my analytical approach, and our business ventures flourished. Each milestone we reached felt like a victory, not just over the past, but as proof of what we could accomplish together. Then one day, Sarah approached me with an idea I hadn't seen coming. I think it's time we gave back, she said, her eyes full of determination. And just like that, a new chapter began. I handled the logistics, applying my analytical skills to budgeting and outreach, while Sarah's warmth and creativity made second chances a welcoming space for those seeking a fresh start. Word spread quickly. Stories of transformation, people regaining confidence, launching businesses, finding new relationships, became the program's greatest testament. What had started as a simple idea grew into something far greater than we had imagined. Soon, we were hosting large-scale seminars, collaborating with therapists and life coaches, and officially transforming Second Chances into a full-fledged nonprofit. During this time, a letter arrived that served as a quiet reminder of how far I had come. It was from Olivia. Seeing her handwriting on the envelope felt like hearing a distant echo of a life I no longer belonged to. I hesitated, uncertain of what emotions it might stir, but in the end, curiosity won out. The letter was surprisingly introspective. She wrote about the mistakes she had made, the consequences of her choices, and her attempts to rebuild her life. She had gone back to school, earning a degree in counseling with the hope of helping others avoid the missteps she had taken. I don't expect forgiveness, she wrote, but I hope you know I regret the pain I caused. I handed the letter to Sarah. She read it carefully, then set it down with a small, knowing smile. It's good that she's finding her way, she said, but she's no longer part of yours. And she was right. While Olivia's words felt genuine, they didn't stir the closure I once thought I needed. That closure had come long before. My life had moved forward in ways I never imagined, and the chapter that included Olivia had closed a long time ago. Not long after, life gave us an unexpected but beautiful surprise. Sarah was pregnant. The news filled me with an overwhelming mix of joy, awe, and nervous excitement. I had always dreamed of being a father, but the reality of it was surreal. Sarah glowed during those months, her excitement contagious. We painted the nursery together, choosing a warm, soft yellow, spending countless nights imagining the adventures ahead with our child. And then, Emily was born. From the moment I held her, everything changed. Her tiny fingers curled around mine, her soft cries filled the room, and in that instant, I knew, this was what life had been leading me toward. She had Sarah's vibrant smile, and as the years passed, my quiet curiosity. Emily wasn't just a blessing. She was proof of how beauty can emerge from pain, how even the darkest storms can give way to the brightest light. As she grew, so did second chances. What began as a small initiative had blossomed into a movement. We launched scholarships for single parents returning to school, created financial literacy workshops, and partnered with local businesses to provide job training programs. The impact stretched further than we could have ever envisioned, and with every success story, our purpose felt even more clear. One afternoon, while attending a community event, I overheard someone mention Olivia's name. I listened quietly as they described her life, far removed from the grand plans she had once envisioned. Her relationship had ended. She was living modestly, trying to rebuild. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel satisfaction. I simply felt nothing. Olivia's story no longer held any power over me. The years passed, and the milestones Sarah, Emily, and I shared became the fabric of our life. Emily's first steps. Her first words. Her first day of school. Each moment felt like a gift. Sarah and I often reflected on our pasts, not with bitterness, but with gratitude for the lessons they had taught us. The pain I had endured had forged resilience. Sarah's unwavering love had shown me what it truly meant to be cherished. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Emily played nearby, her laughter carried by the breeze. Sarah turned to me, her gaze thoughtful. "Do you ever think about what might have been?" she asked softly. I exhaled, considering her question. "Sometimes," I admitted, but only to remind myself how far I've come. I wouldn't change a thing. She reached for my hand, her fingers lacing with mine. "Me neither," she said, smiling as she looked back toward the horizon. The betrayal that had once felt insurmountable was now just a distant memory, eclipsed by the life I had built. Olivia's choices no longer mattered. What mattered was this, Sarah, Emily, the purpose we had created together. The past had simply been a stepping stone to the extraordinary present I now called home.